Sunday lunches had always been a tradition in our family, a moment where generations sat together at the same table. That day, however, the warmth of roast chicken and mashed potatoes could not cover the chill in the air. As I took my seat quietly, my daughter-in-law's voice cut across the room like a knife. "Do not sit here. You do not belong in this family." Her words weren't whispered, they were hurled, sharp enough to silence the chatter and laughter around us. Forks froze mid-air. My son's face turned red, but he didn't say a word. I felt every eye turn toward me, waiting for me to fight back, waiting for me to beg for a place at my own family's table. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up my plate calmly, my hands steady, my back straight. I could feel her smirk stretching wider, as if she had won. What she didn't know was that her cruel words were the spark I had been waiting for. She thought she had the power, but I held something she couldn't even imagine. I looked at her, not with anger, but with a calmness that unsettled her more than any shouting ever could. And that's when it happened. The smile slid off her face. Her confidence faltered. Her color drained as if she had seen a ghost. Her face turned white. If you've ever been pushed aside by someone who believed they were stronger than you, stay with me. What unfolded next was not just a story of humiliation. It was a story of how silence and patience can become the most powerful revenge of all. Because that Sunday lunch was only the beginning, and I promise, you will want to hear every twist that followed. When I was a young woman, I never imagined my life would end up like this, sitting at a table where I was treated like a stranger. My husband Robert and I built our family on respect, love, and traditions. For 42 years, we never missed a Sunday lunch. He loved carving the roast, telling silly jokes, and making sure everyone left the table full and happy. After he passed away from a heart attack at 71, the light of those gatherings dimmed. I thought my son Daniel and his wife, Melissa, would help carry on that tradition, but I was wrong. Melissa was charming when she first entered our lives. Polite smiles, offers to help in the kitchen, asking me about Robert's favorite dishes, it all seemed so genuine. But once the wedding rings were on, her mask began to slip. Little by little, the warmth disappeared. She began to control the seating arrangements, always making sure I sat at the far end of the table, away from the main conversations. If I offered to bring dessert, she would dismiss it with a fake laugh. "Oh no, we don't need any of those old recipes." She started redecorating my home as though it were hers, replacing the curtains Robert had picked with sleek, cold fabric, taking down family photos, and hanging abstract art that had no soul. At first, I told myself it was part of letting go, of adjusting to a younger generation's style. I kept quiet, swallowing my discomfort, but each week, the insults grew sharper. Once she said, "Maybe next time you can just eat in the kitchen, less crowded that way." Another time, she muttered under her breath, "Daniel and I really don't need supervision from the past." My son would sit silently, avoiding my eyes, trapped between loyalty to me and his fear of upsetting her. What hurt the most wasn't her words, it was his silence. A mother can forgive many things, but the quiet abandonment from her own child cuts deeper than any shouted insult. Still, I chose not to lash out. Robert had always said patience was my strongest weapon, and I was about to prove him right. The Sunday lunch, where she openly shouted, "Do not sit here, you do not belong in this family," was the breaking point. Her voice echoed through the dining room. I could feel my ears burning, but I refused to let her see me bend. I picked up my plate calmly, my chin high. That composure was not weakness. It was preparation. She thought she had humiliated me. In truth, she had handed me the perfect stage for what was coming. Melissa loved control, but even more, she loved money. I had watched her appetite for wealth grow over the years. She would brag about her shopping sprees, swipe Daniel's credit card freely, and drop hints about when we finally get the house, as though it were already hers. I knew she thought Robert had left everything to Daniel, and by extension, to her. What she didn't know was that Robert had trusted me with everything. Years ago, after one particularly bitter argument with Daniel over finances, Robert told me, "Our son is weak when it comes to women. Promise me you'll protect what we built." And so he did something unexpected. He left control of our estate to me. The house, the accounts, the investments, they were all in my name. I never flaunted that knowledge. I let Melissa believe her illusions, let her strut around as if she were queen of the castle. I let her insults pile up, waiting for the right moment. Because in life, timing is everything, and that Sunday lunch gave me exactly what I needed. That afternoon, after I left the table with my plate in hand, I excused myself politely and stepped outside for a moment. In my purse, I carried an envelope, thick with papers. Inside were copies of the trust documents Robert and I had signed with our lawyer, along with the deed to the house. I touched the papers and felt Robert's steady hand guiding me. It was almost as if he were whispering, "Now, Margaret, it's time." I wasn't about to throw those documents down carelessly. No, I wanted the reveal to sting, to echo the humiliation Melissa had tried to force on me. That is why I had already called Mr. Whitman, our longtime lawyer. I told him to come by that afternoon, to join us for dessert. He didn't ask questions. He had known Robert and me for decades, and I think he suspected what was happening. As I re-entered the dining room, Melissa looked at me with triumph in her eyes, her mouth twisted into a cruel smirk. "Oh, you're back. Did you finally get the hint?" she sneered. My son stared down at his plate, shoulders hunched, as though hoping the ground would swallow him. I placed my plate gently on the table, sat down, and folded my hands in my lap. I didn't answer her taunt. Silence is sometimes more powerful than words. And just as Melissa opened her mouth to hurl another insult, the doorbell rang. Her eyebrows furrowed. "Who's that?" "We weren't expecting anyone." I smiled calmly. I was. Moments later, Mr. Whitman stepped into the dining room, briefcase in hand, his presence commanding immediate respect. He nodded politely to everyone, then looked directly at me. "Shall we begin?" Melissa's face twitched. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice suddenly shrill. "You'll find out soon enough," I replied softly. At that moment, a shift occurred. For years she had treated me as powerless, a relic of the past. Now, she was the one scrambling, unprepared, as the stage she thought she controlled slipped from beneath her feet. Don't miss what happened next, because this is where everything changed. The calm plate I picked up was just the beginning. The papers in Mr. Whitman's briefcase carried the weight of Robert's final promise to me, and when they were read aloud, Melissa's reign over my family would crumble to dust. Mr. Whitman's arrival that Sunday was no accident. For weeks, I had been quietly preparing for this moment, piecing together every insult, every dismissal, every reminder from Melissa that I was no longer needed. Each slight hardened my resolve, but I didn't act impulsively. Robert had taught me to think 3 steps ahead, to treat life's challenges like a chess game. He used to say, "The queen is the most powerful piece, Margaret. Never forget that." After Robert's funeral, while Melissa busied herself with redecorating and rearranging, I spent my time in the study. Robert's oak desk still smelled faintly of his aftershave, the drawers filled with years of careful records. That's where I found the trust documents again, signed and notarized, waiting like a loaded weapon. I read every line until I knew them by heart. The house was mine, the investments were in my name, and Daniel's inheritance was conditional. He would only receive what Robert left for him if he treated me with dignity and respect. If he failed, everything reverted back to me. Melissa had no idea this clause even existed. She strutted around the house as if she were already its owner, hosting parties, bragging to her friends about her future property, while I stood in the background, invisible in my own home. But I was far from powerless. The more she pushed me aside, the more I began to document her behavior. I started keeping notes, recording the dates and the sharp words she hurled. "You should find somewhere else to live," she sneered one evening. "This place needs younger energy." Daniel tried to laugh it off, but I saw the way his shoulders tensed. I knew he felt the sting too, though he lacked the courage to confront her. I also began meeting with Mr. Whitman quietly. He was a man of discretion, gray-haired with steady eyes, who had guided Robert and me through decades of financial decisions. "It's time," I told him one afternoon in his office. "Melissa has overstepped every boundary. Robert trusted me to protect what we built, and I intend to keep that promise." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Are you certain? Once we move forward, there's no turning back." "I've never been more certain," I answered. We devised a plan. I would continue to attend Sunday lunches, no matter how humiliating, to maintain the illusion that I was defeated. Meanwhile, Mr. Whitman would prepare certified copies of the trust and the deed to the house. He would be ready to appear at my request. Every insult became easier to bear once I knew what was coming. When Melissa told me not to bring dessert, I smiled and nodded. When she whispered to Daniel that I was just dead weight, I kept my head high. Inside, I reminded myself, "Patience, Margaret. The Queen moves when the time is right." In the weeks leading up to that fateful Sunday, I also made subtle changes that Melissa didn't notice. I redirected certain utility bills back into my name. I confirmed with the bank that I was the only one with access to Robert's accounts. I even updated the locks on my personal study. Melissa thought she was in control. But every move she made was inside a castle she didn't own, surrounded by assets she couldn't touch. One moment stands out to me. It was the Sunday before the confrontation. Melissa poured herself a glass of wine, her diamond bracelet glittering under the chandelier, and laughed to one of her friends. "This will all be mine soon. Daniel and I are just waiting for the paperwork." She didn't realize I was standing in the doorway, watching her reflection in the glass. She turned, caught my eye, and smirked as though daring me to contradict her. I didn't. Instead, I walked away silently, my fingers brushing the envelope of documents in my purse. "Soon, Melissa," I thought. "Soon your lies will catch up with you." The night before that final Sunday lunch, I sat alone in my bedroom. Robert's photo was on the nightstand, his kind eyes gazing at me. "I hope I make you proud tomorrow," I whispered. "She thinks she's broken me, but she's about to learn I was never the pawn." When I woke the next morning, I felt a calm resolve. I dressed with care, choosing a navy dress Robert had always said made me look dignified. I tucked the envelope securely into my handbag, my fingers steady. As I walked down the stairs, I passed the family portraits Melissa had tried to remove. I had rehung them in the hallway the night before. That small act of defiance fueled me. At lunch, I followed the script. I took my seat quietly, endured her taunts, until finally she shouted those fateful words, "Do not sit here. You do not belong in this family." That was my cue. I lifted my plate calmly, not a tremor in my hands. But Melissa didn't see what I saw, the clock above the mantel, its hands inching toward 2 o'clock. That was the time Mr. Whitman was scheduled to arrive. As I set my plate down and folded my hands, I knew he would walk through the door any moment. The anticipation was almost electric. Every second that ticked by brought me closer to the reveal. Melissa thought she had humiliated me, but in reality, I was moments away from unmasking her greed before the entire family. The Queen was finally making her move. The knock at the door came right on time. It wasn't loud, but in the silence that followed Melissa's outburst, it sounded like a thunderclap. Everyone looked up, forks still frozen in midair. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and walked to the door with deliberate steps. When I opened it, Mr. Whitman stood there in his tailored suit, his briefcase in one hand, his calm expression betraying nothing. "Margaret," he said with a nod, "shall we?" "Please, come in," I replied. Melissa's eyes narrowed instantly, suspicion flickering across her face. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice sharper than the knife resting by her plate. Mr. Whitman set his briefcase on the table and began unclasping it with the precision of a surgeon. "I'm here on behalf of your late father-in-law," he said. His tone was calm, professional, but it carried weight. Daniel shifted uneasily in his seat, glancing between me and his wife. "On behalf of Robert?" Daniel asked, his voice strained. "Yes," Mr. Whitman replied, pulling out a stack of documents. "Robert Sullivan left behind a trust and a series of instructions regarding his estate. I believe now is the appropriate time to review them." Melissa laughed, though it sounded hollow. "This is ridiculous. Whatever Robert left, it went to Daniel. Everyone knows that." She turned to her husband, eyes flashing. "Tell him, tell her." But Daniel didn't speak. He stared at the papers on the table, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Mr. Whitman slid the first page forward. In fact, Robert's instructions were quite clear. The estate, including all properties, investments, and liquid assets, were placed in a living trust under Margaret's name. Daniel's inheritance is conditional upon one crucial stipulation. He must continue to treat his mother with respect and ensure her comfort and dignity are maintained. Gasps rippled around the table. Melissa's face drained of color. She reached for Daniel's arm, gripping it tightly. "This can't be true," she hissed. This is a trick." "It is no trick, Mrs. Sullivan," Mr. Whitman said firmly. These documents have been notarized, filed, and upheld. Legally, Margaret is the sole trustee and beneficiary. Without her approval, neither you nor Daniel can access any part of Robert's estate. Melissa's lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time since she entered my life, she was speechless. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded neatly in my lap. You see, Melissa, you've been living under an illusion. You thought all of this was yours to control. But this home, these walls, this very table, none of it belongs to you, or even to Daniel. I reached into my handbag and pulled out another envelope. Slowly, I slid the deed across the table. This house is in my name. Always has been. You are guests here, nothing more. Melissa's breath caught. Her face turned pale, almost translucent under the chandelier's light. The headline practically wrote itself in that moment. Her face turned white. The silence stretched until Daniel finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Mom, why didn't you say anything before? I looked at him steadily. Because, Daniel, I wanted to believe you would protect me on your own. I wanted to trust that the son I raised would stand up when his wife tore me down. But you didn't. You let her speak to me as if I were a burden. So I had to protect myself and your father's legacy. Melissa finally found her voice, though it cracked with panic. This isn't fair. We've been managing everything. We've kept this family going, and now you're saying we get nothing? Not nothing, Mr. Whitman corrected. Conditional inheritance. Respect Margaret, honor her role, and you will receive what Robert left for you. Fail to do so, and everything remains under her control. Those are Robert's words, not mine. Melissa pushed back from the table, her chair screeching against the floor. You can't do this to me, she shrieked. I stood, my posture straight, my voice calm. It's already been done. Robert did this years ago. I simply chose today to remind you. The room was heavy with tension. My grandchildren sat wide-eyed, whispering to each other, sensing the shift in power, though they couldn't fully understand it. My son sat with his head in his hands, torn between shame and relief. And Melissa looked like a cornered animal, her arrogance stripped away. I stepped closer to her. You wanted to humiliate me in front of my family. Instead, you exposed your own greed. This family is mine, Melissa. Robert built it with me, not with you. You may have Daniel's ear, but you will never control me. Her lips trembled, her eyes darting to Daniel, searching for rescue, but he said nothing. He couldn't. The truth sat between us on the table, black ink on white paper, undeniable. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat. I believe that concludes my part here. Margaret, if you need further assistance, you know how to reach me. He packed his briefcase, gave me a respectful nod, and left the room. I sat back down, reclaiming my seat at the head of the table. I lifted my fork, cut a piece of chicken, and took a bite in silence. The message was clear. I wasn't going anywhere. Melissa remained frozen, her knuckles white as she clutched the edge of the table. For once, she had no power, no retort, no ground to stand on. The queen had moved, and the game was over. The dining room was suffocatingly silent after Mr. Whitman left. The tick of the grandfather clock in the corner was the only sound. My fork scraped lightly against the porcelain plate as I chewed, slowly and deliberately, reclaiming my meal as though nothing had happened. Every eye was on me, but I refused to look up until I had swallowed. Melissa finally broke the silence. Her voice was brittle, a mix of rage and panic. This isn't over, she spat. Her face was still ghostly pale, but her eyes burned with fury. You think a piece of paper will stop me? Daniel and I are the future of this family. You're just clinging to control because you're afraid of being alone. I set my fork down gently and folded my napkin. Melissa, I said calmly, what you call control, I call survival. What you call fear, I call protection. Robert trusted me to safeguard what we built. And you proved today why he was right. End of talk. Daniel finally looked up, his expression torn. Melissa, maybe we should... Don't you dare, she snapped, cutting him off. Don't you dare take her side. Her voice cracked as she pointed a trembling finger at me. She's manipulating you. Can't you see? She's been planning this. I didn't flinch. Yes, Melissa, I planned to protect myself, because you left me no choice. Melissa's face flushed red now, color returning, not from confidence but from humiliation. She stood abruptly, pacing behind her chair like a trapped animal. So what? You're going to lord this over us for the rest of your life? Sit at the head of the table while we bow to you? That's not a family, that's a dictatorship. I rose to my feet as well, my posture tall and unwavering. A family is built on respect, not fear, not greed. If you had shown me an ounce of kindness, if you had treated me as part of this family instead of an obstacle, none of this would matter. You would have been secure, but you chose arrogance. Melissa's laugh was sharp, almost hysterical. Secure? Don't you understand, Daniel? She spun to face him, her hands gesturing wildly. She's going to cut us out. We'll have nothing. Nothing. All because she can't stand to let go of power. Daniel looked at me, his eyes full of conflict. Mom, is that true? I met his gaze. Daniel, everything your father and I built is still meant for you, but only if you honor the condition he set. Respect me, that's all. Respect your mother. If you can't even do that, then yes, you will have nothing. Robert was clear. Daniel's shoulders sagged. He rubbed his temples, silent. Melissa whirled back toward me, her fury unchecked. You're a bitter old woman. You can't buy love with money, and you can't make me respect you with a piece of paper. No, I said softly, my voice cutting through her anger. But I can make sure you never profit from your cruelty. And Duan. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The weight of that truth pinned her to the spot. The grandchildren shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them whispered, "Mom, stop." But Melissa ignored them. She stormed toward me, her heels clicking against the floor. For a moment, I thought she might strike me, but when she reached me, she simply leaned in, her voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this." I looked her straight in the eyes. "No, Melissa, you will." She recoiled as if slapped. The tension in the room was unbearable. I could feel my heart pounding, but my face remained composed. That calm unsettled her more than any outburst could. She thrived on chaos, on seeing others lose control. My serenity was her defeat. Daniel finally stood, his voice strained. "Enough, both of you. This isn't helping." He turned to Melissa. "You've gone too far. You humiliated my mother in front of everyone. And now this?" Melissa's jaw dropped. "You're siding with her, after everything?" "I'm not siding with anyone," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I just can't keep pretending this is normal." Melissa's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of rage. "You coward," she hissed. "You're nothing without me. You always needed me to push you forward. And now you're going to let her control you like a child?" Daniel flinched as if struck. I stepped closer, my voice steady. "Melissa, you mistake love for weakness and loyalty for control. But today you've exposed yourself. You showed this family who you truly are." Her breathing quickened. She looked around the room, searching for support, but found none. The grandchildren avoided her eyes. Daniel stood frozen. The weight of isolation pressed down on her. Finally, she grabbed her purse from the sideboard, her movements jerky. "Fine. If this is how it's going to be, then I'm leaving." No one stopped her. We listened as her heels clicked furiously down the hallway, the slam of the front door reverberating through the house. The silence she left behind was deafening. I exhaled slowly and sat back down. My hands trembled slightly under the table, but I hid it well. I picked up my fork again, reclaiming my meal once more. One of my granddaughters whispered, "Grandma, are you okay?" I smiled at her gently. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm better than okay." Daniel lowered himself back into his chair, his face pale. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," I replied. "But you do need to think about what you want your children to remember. Do you want them to grow up watching their father stand silent while their mother disrespected their grandmother? Or do you want them to remember a man who stood for respect, for family?" He swallowed hard, tears forming in his eyes. For the first time in years, I saw the boy I once raised staring back at me. The meal resumed, though more quietly. Each bite I took was a declaration. I belonged here. I always had. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared and the grandchildren were put to bed, Daniel sat with me in the living room. The lamplight cast long shadows across the familiar walls. He cleared his throat. "Mom, I failed you. I should have stopped her a long time ago." I laid my hand on his. You still can. It's not too late to choose differently. He nodded, his jaw set with determination. I will. I promise. That promise mattered more to me than any paper Mr. Whitman could bring. Robert's trust was protection, yes, but Daniel's acknowledgement that was healing. Upstairs, I could hear Melissa moving about angrily, slamming drawers, muttering curses under her breath. I knew the battle wasn't truly over. People like her didn't surrender easily. She would try again, perhaps in subtler ways. But now, the balance had shifted. She no longer held the illusion of control. The truth had been spoken, written, sealed in ink, and witnessed by all. As I sat there, sipping my tea, I felt Robert's presence beside me, his hand warm on mine. The Queen is the most powerful piece, he had said, and tonight I had proven it. The next morning, the house felt heavier than usual. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, but it couldn't lift the tension that hung in the air. I woke early, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table where Robert used to read the paper. My hands cradled the warm mug as I thought about everything that had unfolded the day before. The documents had been laid on the table, Melissa had stormed out, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of silence leaning in my favor. But I knew Melissa. Silence from her was never surrender, it was strategy. I didn't have to wait long. Around mid-morning, I heard the sharp sound of her heels on the hardwood floor. She entered the kitchen, her hair still perfect, makeup flawless, but her eyes gave her away. They were wild, desperate, like a cornered fox searching for an escape. We need to talk, she said flatly. I gestured toward the chair across from me. By all means. She sat down, dropping her purse onto the table with a heavy thud. You think you humiliated me yesterday, she began, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. But you haven't won. You can't possibly believe Daniel will choose you over me. I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering. It's not about winning, Melissa. It's about respect. Something you've never given me. Her lips curled into a sneer. Respect? You expect me to respect someone who's clinging to the past? Someone who should have gracefully stepped aside years ago? Families evolve. You're in the way. I set the mug down firmly. I'm not in the way. This is my home. Robert and I built it brick by brick, memory by memory. You walked in here with your high heels and your cold smile, and you thought you could erase me. But you can't erase the foundation. Melissa leaned forward, her tone sharp. You don't understand how this works. Daniel listens to me. He always has. If I tell him to cut you off, he will. He's weak, and you know it. Her words sliced at me, but I refused to let her see the wound. Yes, Daniel has his weaknesses, but he is also my son. Deep down, he knows who raised him, who sacrificed for him. And yesterday, he saw you for what you are. You've been exposed. Her face twisted, fury flashing in her eyes. Exposed? You think flashing some dusty papers makes you powerful? Papers don't keep families together. Money doesn't buy love. When I'm through with you, those grandchildren will despise you. They'll see you as the reason their parents fought. I felt my chest tighten at her words, but I steadied my voice. Children grow up, Melissa. They see truth eventually. Lies and manipulation can only hide for so long. You've underestimated them, just as you've underestimated me. And for Lo. Her hands slammed on the table. I will not be cast aside. Do you hear me? I will not be the woman who gets nothing. I didn't flinch. Instead, I stood, meeting her eye with calm resolve. You already are. Yesterday proved it. The house, the assets, the trust, they're not yours. You can rage all you want, but the law doesn't bend to tantrums, and neither do I. Her face flushed crimson, and for a moment I thought she might strike me. But then something shifted. Her shoulders slumped slightly, her mask of arrogance cracking. So what happens now? She asked, her voice quieter, almost pleading. That depends on you, I answered. You can choose respect. You can build something real with this family. Or you can keep fighting me and lose everything. The choice has always been yours. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't form the words. For once, she seemed uncertain, caught between fury and fear. You think Daniel will forgive you if you cut us off financially? She finally whispered. I don't need to cut him off, I said. Robert already gave him a path. Honor me, and he inherits what was meant for him. Disrespect me, and he inherits nothing. That was his father's decision. I'm simply upholding it. Melissa's eyes flickered, her confidence draining again. She pushed back her chair abruptly, grabbing her purse. "This isn't finished," she muttered, her voice low. "You'll regret standing in my way." As she stormed out, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my coffee again, but I forced myself to steady them. She was right about one thing. This wasn't finished. People like Melissa don't back down easily. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a pawn on her board. I felt like the queen Robert always told me I was, and I was ready for the next move. That evening, Daniel asked me to join him in the den. The fire flickered low in the hearth, casting shadows across his tired face. He looked like a man divided in half, one part still tethered to his wife, the other reaching back toward the boy I had raised. "Mom," he began, his voice strained. "I don't know what to do. Melissa is furious. She says you're trying to destroy our marriage. She swears you only care about the money." I studied him for a long moment before replying. "Daniel, I don't want your marriage destroyed, but I will not let her destroy me in the process. Your father gave me this responsibility because he knew you might not see clearly when it came to her. And yesterday proved him right." He dropped his head into his hands. "I love her, Mom, but she makes everything a war. It's exhausting." "Love isn't supposed to drain you," I said softly. "It's supposed to strengthen you. If the person beside you can't show respect to your own mother, what kind of foundation is that?" Before he could answer, the door burst open. Melissa stood there, her face pale but her eyes blazing. She had been listening. "Foundation?" she spat. "This house is the foundation I was promised, and now she's ripped it away from me." I rose to my feet. "Melissa, this house was never yours to claim. It was Robert's gift to me, and mine to protect." She marched forward, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You've poisoned him against me. You've dangled that trust over his head like a weapon. How dare you?" Daniel stood as well, holding up his hands. "Stop, Melissa. Enough. Mom isn't the problem here." Her head whipped toward him, eyes wide. "You're defending her? After everything?" "Yes," he said firmly, his voice stronger than I'd heard in years. "Because she's right. I've been blind, letting you treat her like she doesn't matter. I should have stopped you a long time ago." Melissa staggered back as if he'd struck her. You can't mean that." "I do," he replied, his tone steady. "This isn't about money. It's about respect, and you've crossed every line." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were the tears of a woman realizing her grip was slipping. "If you side with her, you'll regret it. You'll lose me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Maybe I already have." The room fell silent. I watched him, pride and sorrow mixing in my chest. It wasn't easy for him to say those words, but he had finally found his voice. Melissa's hands shook as she clutched her necklace. "So what? You're choosing her over me, after everything I've done for you?" Daniel shook his head. "You didn't do it for me. You did it for yourself. And I'm tired, Melissa. I'm tired of walking on eggshells, tired of watching you tear down the woman who gave me life. If you can't change, then maybe this marriage can't survive." Her face crumpled, then hardened again. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "Both of you." She turned and stormed out, the slam of the door shaking the walls. Daniel sank back into his chair, his head falling into his hands once more. "God, Mom, what have I done?" I sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've done what your father always hoped you would. You stood up for what's right. That's not weakness, Daniel, that's strength." He looked up at me, tears shining in his eyes. "But if she leaves me," I interrupted gently. "If she leaves because you demanded respect for your own mother, then she was never truly with you. A marriage built on disrespect will collapse eventually, with or without me. At least now, you've drawn the line." He nodded slowly, as though the weight of years had finally lifted from his shoulders. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he admitted. "Neither do I said honestly. "But whatever comes, you'll face it with a clearer conscience, and so will I." The fire crackled softly, filling the silence. For the first time in years, I felt a strange peace. The battle wasn't fully over. Melissa was not a woman who surrendered easily. But the tide had turned. Daniel had chosen to see me, to defend me, to step out from under her shadow. And that, I thought, was victory enough for now. The days that followed felt like breathing fresh air after years of being smothered. The house was quieter without Melissa's constant criticisms echoing down the halls. For the first time in a long while, I could walk through my own home without feeling like an intruder. I placed Robert's photos back on the mantel, rehung the curtains he had chosen, and filled the dining table with fresh flowers. Each small act was a reclaiming, not of property, but of dignity. Melissa stayed away. She sent Daniel furious text messages, demanding he pack up and leave with her. When he hesitated, she accused him of betrayal, of being weak, of letting me manipulate him. But Daniel didn't run this time. He stayed. He spent more evenings with me and the children, quietly mending the threads of a bond Melissa had worked so hard to unravel. One night, he sat across from me in the kitchen, his expression heavy with guilt. "Mom," he said softly, "I let her convince me you were the problem. I let her twist everything until I didn't know what was true anymore. I should have defended you years ago." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Daniel, guilt doesn't heal. Change does. You see things clearly now. That's enough." Tears welled in his eyes. "Do you think Dad would forgive me?" I smiled, though my own heart ached. "Your father loved you fiercely. He'd be proud that you finally found your strength. He didn't want me to fight you, he wanted me to protect you. And I think, in his way, he still has." The grandchildren adjusted faster than I expected. Without Melissa's constant tension, they seemed lighter, happier. They ran through the halls laughing, the sound filling the house with a joy I had almost forgotten. One evening, my eldest granddaughter slipped her small hand into mine and whispered, "Grandma, I'm glad you're still here." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. Melissa's absence was a storm cloud lingering on the horizon, but I no longer feared it. If she returned, it would be on different terms. She could no longer use me as her target or wield control through intimidation. The truth was out, and it had reshaped everything. One Sunday, a few weeks after the confrontation, I prepared lunch myself. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, Robert's favorites. As the family gathered around the table, I felt his presence so strongly it was almost tangible. Daniel carved the chicken with steady hands, smiling faintly, and the grandchildren chattered happily. No one raised their voice, no one sneered. For the first time in years, the table felt whole again. I lifted my glass. "To Robert," I said, my voice steady, "to family, and to respect, the foundation of both." Glasses clinked softly around the table. Daniel met my eyes, his expression filled with something I had feared I would never see again: trust. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Humiliation, silence, patience, and finally, truth. Melissa had believed she could erase me with words, but in the end, it was her greed that erased her power. I didn't need to shout or rage. I only needed to stand firm and let the truth do its work. Robert's voice echoed in my memory. "The Queen is the most powerful piece." He had been right. I had felt like a pawn for too long, moved around at Melissa's whim. But now, I knew my worth. I wasn't just surviving, I was living again. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. Sometimes the calmest person in the room is the most dangerous. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply refusing to be erased. If you've ever been made to feel small, remember this. Your strength doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from standing taller, from knowing who you are even when others try to tell you otherwise. That was my lesson. That was my revenge. And that Sunday lunch, the one Melissa thought would break me, became the day I was reborn.